So yeah, I will kick things off here. What's up, everybody? I'm pretty decent at checking the comments while I talk and while we go through this. So if you have any questions, you throw them in there. Comments. I'll do my best to kind of moderate as we go here. But I'm really excited to hang out with you all, and the reason is pretty simple. Is my goal is to help as many marketers, content creators to be as effective as possible and to realize their potential. And I know that phrase kind of gets thrown around a lot. I think B2B's picked it up a bit, but the truth is I've been able to not only have a lot of success, but to really feel like I'm reaching my potential, that I'm doing the best work that I can. And it really comes down to a few key principles that I've learned and that I want to share with you today, because I found there's so many great marketers, there's so much great ideas and creativity going around, but a lot of times it dies on the executive cutting floor, right? Or like the editing floor, which is like, great ideas don't come to life, maybe because you didn't convey it the right way, or you didn't really know how to get exec buy-in, or you had a really great idea that did get to go live, but it just didn't really hit your expectations. And maybe it's because the content just needed to be tweaked a little bit. And so I'm here to just share what's worked for me, to share my point of view, and to hopefully learn from yours in the chat here and see if there's anything that I can help with specifically. And so there's three chapters to today. And the first one is kind of just wanting to start to unravel the difference between content marketing and content strategy. And they are most definitely not the same, but I do see them get mixed up a lot. And I think they kind of get used interchangeably. And at the highest level, content strategy is your what and your why. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And that why is super important. When I coach my team, I tell them you should be able to look at anything you're doing, and I should be able to go, hey, Amrita, why are you doing that? And it sounds a little defensive at first, the question, why are you doing that? But the truth is, you should be able to say, well, we're doing this because we're building on LinkedIn because blank. We're decided to do TikTok instead of YouTube because blank, or whatever that thing is. And when you're able to answer why, you're able to start to reframe to your boss, to your CEO, to the organization of how you should be doing marketing at your company. And when you can own that narrative, when you can speak to it really clearly and confidently, that's when you're going to be able to, that's when you're viewed as a strategic thinker. And you're going to be able to unlock a lot of barriers, get a lot more freedom, and oftentimes more budget to go do bigger, better things. Content marketing is the how. It is what are the actual things we're going to do once those decisions have been made, once we understand what we're doing, how are we actually going to do it? And a lot of times the quick way you can think about it, it's the production. It's the things you're actually going to produce and some of the processes that go within that. And so I have an example here, and I don't know, I'm in my 30s. I won't say how old. I got a couple kids. So I try to avoid being the like old man telling the folks to get off my lawn and like, hey, that's not the way you do things. You should do it this way. I have a point of view, but I came across this post recently, and I see a lot of them on LinkedIn. Whereas a gentleman who I follow, I remove their names. There's no need to throw shade. I actually like this guy, but I completely disagree with this, which, he says, hey, steal my content strategy. And then, one LinkedIn post per day, one carousel per week. I'll let you read the rest. And when I read this, I was like, this is not a content strategy. At best, this is a content calendar, right? It's starting to show some of the velocity that you're going to do. But this isn't a strategy because it doesn't say why you're doing any of those things. It doesn't have any insight into the topics that you're going to cover. How are those topics relating to your strategic goals? And so it's really not a complete strategy. And so it's okay if you're looking at this like, wow, this is a great content strategy. And you're like, wait, hold on, Devin's saying it's not. That's okay. My hope today is that you look at this and go, okay, this is a good starting place, but how can I get more strategic? And how can I start to think bigger and have a bigger impact? And if you're ever in doubt and you're like, no, that's a good content strategy, take that to your CEO and see how that conversation goes. It's not going to go very well because you're going to get a bunch of questions and a bunch of uncertainty because it's not quite fulfilled. It's not complete enough. So when you think about a content strategy, here's one way to think about it. A content strategy is a system for specific outputs or for specific outcomes. And so this is oftentimes it gets kind of complex, right? You might have, Amrita talked about it. It's full funnel, right? So you might have different systems for top of funnel and conversion versus maybe pipeline acceleration or expansion. You might have different systems for social media, for web, for paid partnerships, right? There's so many different things going on together. And so your goal is to build these little systems to build an overarching engine that works really well, as consistent, and that is I want to say the opposite of disjointed. So it's very consistent and congruent with each other, right? Things make sense. If you interact with a company on their YouTube page, it looks and feels and makes sense when you can interact with them on web, and so on and so forth. So this is a helpful way that I like to think about it. Content strategy is like your blueprint. It's your big strategic goal, or excuse me, big strategic outline of what you're going to achieve and how you're going to get there. And here's a couple things that can be helpful for you as you're building yours. One is it aligns to the strategic company goals. We're going to talk about that at the third chapter of this chat today. It includes KPIs, and those KPIs are going to link your content and your channel growth and those outcomes to those strategic company outcomes, right? So why, Devin, did you build a LinkedIn audience of over 100,000, I think almost 200,000 now at Gong? Well, there's a reason for that. Let me explain, and why we're starting to track those KPIs and why we're investing dollars there. Other things are like, what type of engine are you building? Are you building enterprise thought leadership, or are you building big SEO, right? A big SEO shop because maybe you have a higher ASP, or excuse me, a lower ASP, and that might be helpful, right? So you start to get the idea. Other things are like channel strategy. Where are you going to win? And there's a good example actually that really delineated this for me. They've since rebranded. If someone in the chat knows, feel free to shout it out. But Keep Truckin'. There's a company called Keep Truckin'. They're still around. I just can't remember the name. And they had this really brilliant strategy. And it's very simple. And a lot of times the best things are simple. But they knew that their audience are truck drivers. So imagine the big diesel, the big 18-wheelers. If you're a kid, you might drive by and tell them to do this, to honk their horn. And that was their audience. And so they made a strategic decision on which channel to pick based on where their audience is all day, every day, which is inside of a truck. So what they decided to do was launch a podcast, because they said, hey, folks are sitting and listening. They listen to the radio, probably listen to other podcasts. Let's build there versus a blog versus a video that you're going to have to watch. And it was extremely successful. That seems like a simple decision in hindsight, but as you're starting to build out your content strategy, one decision like that, the right decision on where to build and why, is going to help elevate your career and make sure that you're much more successful in your content marketing efforts. Taking a pause here to let that soak in, and also put my computer on do not disturb because I'm in one too many group chats. If you have any questions about content strategy versus content marketing, feel free to put in the comments here. I'll do my best. And thank you, Barb. Shout out to Barb. Keep Truckin' is now Motive. That's cool. I kind of like Keep Truckin'. All right, cool. Let's talk about the next part of today, which is how to make your content stand out. How to make your content stand out. And one of the things that we had talked about when I was prepping with Amrita was, we've all heard that we're playing in the attention economy. Or really the difference is you're now playing it, whether you know it or not, you are playing in the attention economy. The difference is, are you winning or not? And is your content marketing built in a way that's going to help you stand out and be different instead of trying to be marginally better? Right? So here's a good example. If I'm competing with Now Motive, Keep Truckin', it might not make sense to do the exact same type of podcast, but a little bit better. Just a little bit. We're going to take the same format, maybe the same length, same value prop, but we're just going to try to make a little bit higher production value. That's probably not going to work, because you're copying who's in first. And when you're copying who's leading, at best, you're going to get second place. And so another way to think about it is, what can we do that's completely different? Maybe it's still a podcast because that's the right channel, but we want to do something that's completely different. One way that you can hook your audience is to add emotion. And I'll share an example with you. And it's kind of ironic because I'm on a webinar now, but I was on a webinar when I'd first started. I was saying I just moved from sales to marketing. And I signed up for this webinar, and I had three big wigs, three folks who've been in content and marketing for a long time. And so I'm like, great, I got my notepad out. I'm going to learn. I'm going to get some of the fundamentals that I need to get better and really succeed in this new career. And when I got on the webinar, one of the big, tips they're going to give was how to stand out. And one of the answers was that you need to add emotion. It's not B2B. It's really human to human, right? Raise your hand if you've heard this before. And so I'm like, okay, great. What kind of emotion should I do? And I remember having my pen ready on my notepad, ready to figure this thing out. And the moderator was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then they moved on. And I was left there with okay, but what do I do with that? What do you mean when you add emotion? What kind of emotion? How much emotion? And so while I was let down by that webinar, what I did do is force me to really think through, what is my emotions strategy? And you can link it to your brand strategy. That's a part of it, because content and brand obviously have a lot of overlap there. But I really wanted to figure out kind of my style. And so I'm going to share the three things that I thought about. Maybe it'll be helpful for you as well. But there's three questions that I wanted to answer when it came to which emotions I want to convey or incite in my content. So the first one was, which emotions universally have the strongest pull? The emotion that's going to affect the most people, right? So I can cast a wide net within my target audience. The next one, number two, was which emotions naturally align with my personality or your brand's personality. Because it's really tough to be bold and outgoing if in your content, or try to do that if that's not who you are. It's not who your brand is, right? It's going to feel disjointed, and it'll kind of feel inauthentic. And then the third one, speaking of standing out, was which emotions are overused in B2B today so I can avoid them. So which emotions have the strongest pull? Which emotions naturally align with your brand and yourself? And which ones are overused so you can avoid them? And so I started thinking through it. And the three that I landed on are curiosity, anticipation, and surprise. Those might be kind of surprising, no pun intended, because that's not something you might hear about a lot. But the reason why is curiosity incites action, because what you can do from subject lines to blog posts is tiptoe the space between being vague and mysterious to get your reader to experience wonder, to get them to think, I wonder what's on the other side of this email. I wonder what's going to happen in the next paragraph. The more that you can incite curiosity, you're going to keep people engaged, because we naturally are wired to want to answer that curiosity, right? We want to have a resolve. Similarly is anticipation. We want to use anticipation as a means to keep attention. So things you can do is keep the reveal, do a teaser, do a big hook and tease it out, and then deliver the big aha moment a little bit later. And the last one is surprise, which is provide something to somebody that they're not expecting. And this is rarely done in B2B, because so often in B2B, folks want to be as educational, as informational, because we view credibility in the B2B lens as who's the smartest in the room, who knows it all. And we don't maybe think that consciously, but subconsciously, we're constantly trying to convey as much information so people think that we're credible and know a lot. But instead, what I would recommend, and what's worked really well for me, is to think about what's an unexpected way to do that. And again, that's both the emotions that you share, which is how you share that content, but also the content itself. So I hope that's helpful. Let's see. It looks like I've hit insightful, relevant, actionable. I actually want to jump to Amrita's part here. Oh, forgive me. I messed up on my slides, folks. I was trying to get to you, Amrita. I wanted to get to your LinkedIn post.
I have a little example, kind of like stemming from, because I've heard you say some of these things before, right? And I was like, okay, how do I get better at my, at the most base level? How do I get better at my LinkedIn game? And that's a type of content creation, right? It's not necessarily long form, but it's still a way to hook an audience. And I generally know who I'm connected to. A lot of people I'm connected to are other marketers, perhaps some founders, some folks in sales, etc. So given what Superside does, given where my interests lie, and given that both of those things align with our audience, I was like, okay, I should get a little bit more active on LinkedIn. And you know, I do have a ton of stuff to say, but I think having a framework like the way you've like laid it out, the, you know, whatever it is that you lay out for yourself, but the way that you've laid it out, I was like, wow, there's really something here. Let me actually give it a shot and see if that helps with reach. I had one goal in mind. I was like, let me write it my way. Let me see what happens to the reach, and let me write it Devin's way, and let me see what I did it without telling you. So here's what I
Yeah.
did. So what you guys can see on the screen is on the left is, or to my left is what in green is what, you know, I wrote initially. So I wanted to write this post about how like everybody and their mother, every time they get a new job in marketing, they're like, woohoo, like everyone, I have this new job, but also send me your tips, give me your best playbook so I can be successful. Like there's this like common trend, and in a way it's like they're kind of announcing their new job, but they're also asking for help. Like it's like a cry for help.
Yeah.
And every time I read those, I just always cringe. And I cringe because it's like, oh my God, you just have this new job and you have no idea that there's no playbook. Like, wow, you're doomed, right? That's the thought that goes through my head. So to try to poke fun at it a little bit, I wrote this post on the left. And I was like, wait a second, let me Devinize this. So I looked at one of the posts that you had, I think maybe I think you had posted this on LinkedIn as a teaching moment. So I pulled that. Someone had sent it to me. So I pulled that, and there's all these amazing tidbits. So Diana, if you don't mind just like showing this on screen, the whole thing, so that people can see what Devin actually showed. I don't know if there's a way to make that bigger, but there's like a couple of great things, right? So there's like a great hook. There's the anticipation piece that Devin talked about, because there's right below the first line, he says, but also ... And then it's like, you have to, like, if you're on mobile, especially, you kind of have to expand that to kind of see what he's talking about, if assuming he has hooked you. And then there's a bit of humor, and then there's like an amazing punchline, right? So I was like, okay, at least let me try to do that. Maybe I can't do all of these things, but let me just try to do the basics. So next slide, please. Then on the right, you'll see how I rewrote it using Devin's way, right? So it's still the same premise, but what I did is I wrote the first line as the hook, almost like I think third person view is the right way to say it. So when new heads of marketing get new jobs, this is what they say. So I opened with that. That's a truism, right? So lots of people are like, oh yeah, I've seen that. So you're nodding your head. And then I'm like, anticipation, pause, right? So, but also, and then I lead with the punchline. But dude, like there's no playbook. And then I lay out my thinking. The meat is in the thinking, but no one's going to read that thinking if I don't hook them the right way, if I didn't tee it up the right way, right? If people aren't already nodding along, they're not actually going to read this thing that's probably going to cause a bit of cognitive overload. And then they have to clock that in their brain and make a note somewhere. Like it's a lot of work for someone to fully absorb this. So I kind of have to build that momentum, that snowball effect. And I was able to do that. Posted it like my usual way, just wrote it quickly on mobile, just like edited it quickly with Devin's way. Posted it, went for lunch, came back, it's blown up, right? And next slide, please. I mean, I post on LinkedIn, I'd say on average, maybe once a week for the last little while. I don't think I've had this type of reach in like maybe a couple of years. I've had a couple of viral posts, but this is, for me at least, viral, right? Like 50,000 impressions is pretty great. I'm connected to
Fantastic.
a lot of, yeah. And it's again, the meat didn't change, but the way I reeled people in changed. So I just want to show an example of how, if you put what Devin is saying into practice, you can actually get distribution on eyeballs, which is the goal of a lot of our content marketing.
I love this example, and I hadn't seen the full talk through, so I didn't like pay Amrita to say, "Hey, my coaching works. Can you tell everybody that it does?" I saw this post though, and I liked it genuinely, and I clicked the like button. And so I think there's like, I want to talk about the emotional part, and then there's the equation I kind of skipped over that I want to go back to Amrita too. But like my favorite line, maybe because I'm Mr. Casual in my hoodie, but like there's no playbook in caps. But then you like, if you had said there's no playbook exclamation point, you'd be like, damn, Amrita's like shouting at me. And that is emotion, but not the one anyone really wants to feel, right? No one likes to be like yelled at. I call it a finger waggy. Like when your grandma, your mom or dad be like, don't do that. Like, no, that doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel the way you want. But when you soften it with a very comical, and is it millennial or Gen Z, whatever's after me?
Probably, yeah, millennial, I think.
Whatever my 16-year-old brother is, who calls me bruh all the time. despite being his actual bruh. But anyway, it softens it, right? And it shows like a lot of like personality. And then I think that's why also people, oh yeah, that hooks them emotionally. And then they go through your tips. I'm going to go back, and Amrita, you're welcome to stay as long as you wish, because I like hanging out with you. But I wanted to talk about this slide right here. Folks can see it. The motion is kind of like how you're making people feel. The formula for highly engaging content, I wanted to go over Amrita's version with you all, is there's 3 parts. If there's one thing that you keep today, I have to say this is probably the most valuable thing from a content production standpoint, is if you want to create highly engaging content, it has to hit these 3 marks. The first one is insightful, next one's relevant, and the next one's actionable. So the insightful thing is, are you providing something that is changing the way people think, or reminding them of something that they already knew, perhaps, but in a valuable way? So invaluable is like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. So it's up to you and the reader. But Amrita's point on that post was like, look, everyone joins a new job. Everyone thinks there's some playbook, and it doesn't exist. There is no playbook. And Amrita, especially being a VP, is like, oh, wow, that's really powerful, because everyone thinks Amrita and other VPs have it all figured out. And like, there's a playbook for everything, and you just copy paste. And I'm also speaking for myself. I was like, that's really insightful. And also, it made me feel like, oh, good. It's not just me trying to figure shit out. Excuse me. I hope I get one curse word on these shows. Everyone, that like makes Amrita very relatable. And that's where we get to relevant, right? The topic of that is extremely relevant to a niche group of people. A lot of people might look at that and go, oh, that's not for me. And that's great, because the people it's for are going to be like, oh my God, Amrita's speaking directly into my soul right now. This is amazing. And then the actionable side, where what those bullets were, if I can figure out how to scroll back, right? These things are insightful and actionable. If you have a good hypothesis, your hit rate can be like, these are things like, oh, if I have a good hit rate, I can do this. If I have this. So it's like, she's giving me advice on creating systems and workflows. She's saying there's no answer. She's giving me the formula to build my own answer. And that's why I love this post so much, because it's insightful, relevant, and actionable.
Devin, can I just butt in and just ask?
Yeah.
I think you kind of touched on this in an implicit way, but the messenger of the message sometimes matters, right? Because the same post written by somebody else may not land the same way. And you kind of touched on that, but maybe you could just tell the audience how to think about that.
Yeah. So kind of like the relevance, like the message relevance with like the person posting, like the writer. I think it's like, so because you're a VP and you're speaking new heads of marketing on socials, you're speaking to your peers. You're right away. You're like, if the first 4 words are, I either have to be a head of marketing or want to be one, right? So maybe if I'm in marketing, that could be interesting. So right away, you've already kind of set the table of who this is for. And that's why I was like, if you're in sales and you don't give it anything about marketing, you're going to scroll on, right? And so I like that a lot. Now, titles come with a lot of credibility, but even in SDR, I think could have done the same thing. And I just use SDR because often that's the group of people that talk to me and say, I don't feel like I have a lot to say because I'm new and I'm sometimes young, and like, I don't feel like I have authority. But it could be very well, as new SDR joins company and says, send me your tips. And it's like, hey, there is no prospecting playbook. There is no thing you copy paste, but here's what I've learned. Cause that's really what you're saying is underneath, like, here's what you need to do. You know how to prospect confidently. You know how to So at the end, you could still get a lot of engagement because you're speaking to things that you have credibility about. You have experience about that, and it's extremely relevant to your audience.
Makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Hot tip, spicy wings. People only share if you make them feel something. Folks might have heard this before. People make decisions emotionally, and then they rationalize it, and then they finalize it using the rational side of their brain, right? So for example, you want to make someone feel something to hook them, and then that's oftentimes we provide kind of the data side to really kind of confirm that that decision. And a lot of times it's things, think of like impulse buys. We buy things a lot of times because of the way we think it's going to make us feel. We don't always check our budget. We don't always, do a cost loss analysis on these things. And so if you think about how am I going to get people to engage with my content, and most importantly, how am I going to get people to share my content, you have to make them feel something. So lean on that formula, the insightful, relevant, actionable. Think about your emotions strategy. What are you going to make people feel intentionally through your content. And the more that you start to do these things, the more that you practice this formula and this form of writing for emotion, that's how you really build a brand. And that's also how you build anticipation. People are going to look forward to your content for a specific reason. And that's actually a gift. It's a gift if you could have an audience who is looking for you and has expectations because you've set those expectations. And so it's a really great thing. All right, I'm gonna look in the chat here for a sec, see if there's any questions. It's Gen Z with alpha on its heels. I don't know what Lisa's talking about, but that's funny to me. Zoe has a good question. How does urgency or why should I care about this right now play into this? This is a fantastic question. And that's all about relevance. And so here's an example. I'll speak to my own and feel free to do a follow-up, Zoe. So the last 5-ish years of my career have been marketing to salespeople. Having been one, I know very well that they base their attention on a very calendar-based system. So for example, at the beginning of a quarter, call it January 1st, they're focused on prospecting, building pipeline. And then the last 2-3 weeks of the quarter, they're focused on closing pipeline, and they don't really focus as much as they probably should on prospecting, right? So it's very like build pipeline, try to close pipeline, build, convert, and then close pipeline, kind of in this quarterly cycle. And so when I was building out the content calendar for this audience, I would pick my topics based on where their mind is at and their attention is at. So for example, on the first week of January, I'm not going to publish how to close deals with CFOs because their mindset isn't there. It's still relevant to a degree. It still applies to them as a persona, but it doesn't matter to them right now in this exact moment so much as how to prospect to CFOs, for example. And so aligning it, one, you have to understand your audience, right? Every audience has some sort of seasonality to their business and to their lives that you can tap into, some more than others. And so the more that you can understand your audience in that way, the more that you can design your editorial calendar to not just be relevant. Don't just try to be relevant, try to be hyper relevant. Try to think of the thing that they woke up today and either are thinking about or somewhere deep in their mind know they should be thinking about it. And you can start to pull them, towards your content because of how relevant you are. Me and Lisa are hanging out. I got a couple in the Gen Z category. All right, let's move on. Let's see where we're at here. Oh yeah, I like this one. Okay. There's like your Nike has just do it. Everyone's got their kind of slogans. Do the unexpected is mine. It's kind of to myself. I'm laughing at Zoe. This is fun. I hope people keep talking in the comments. It's actually like one of my favorite parts other than talking to Amrita. So a lot of folks know me from Gong. If you're familiar with Gong at all, it was very much it was a standout brand on purpose. We were trying to be different. What we did was we looked at what everyone else was doing. We looked at all of our competitors. We looked at the broader B2B sales tech space, and we started to look at what are they all doing? What are the patterns that they're all doing? And what we noticed was they all kind of looked the same-ish. We actually jokingly called it Series A blue because almost all these, like when I joined Gong around Series A, all these companies looked, Series A blue. It's this hue of safe blue. How are they acting on channels? Oh, they're all kind of acting this way, posting this similar fashion. The tone is kind of the same. And so what I did was I looked at that and I said, okay, I have my plan. I have my channels. I have my strategic goals. But I want to look at my attention competitors. And these are the folks that your content and your marketing is fighting for attention, not necessarily for budget dollars, though that's part of it. And I want to do something different. And what I found was by picking different emotions, by picking different tones from a creative side, picking different colors, highly expressive faces before it was overly popularized on YouTube. That was the things that would help us stand out to hook and really grab attention. And then using the formula insightful, relevant, actionable is how we kept it. And when you're consistently doing this over time, when you're consistently doing the unexpected, that's how you can consistently stand out. That's how you're going to grab attention easier than your competitors. And it's going to drive them crazy. You're going to build a better, stronger audience than your competitors, and that's going to drive them crazy. And what you end up doing is you can build a moat a competitive differentiator can be your moat of you have the audience, you have the attention, and you're the one that your audience, your potential buyers, your clients, and now your competitors are looking at to say, hey, what are they doing? Because they're the ones leading. And it all starts, if you ask the book of Devin Reed, is do the unexpected. Take the time to really analyze what's going on different channels for your audience and do something completely different. Beautiful. Oh, whoops. I kind of jumped the gun a bit, but this is good. This is a good one too. 3-step formula for standing out. So first, if you're wondering how to do this, this is an activity you can do today. There's still time, even if you're in EST or overseas. I saw some overseas folks. So first is identify your channel and your timing. So which channels, let's use LinkedIn for an example. Okay. I'm going to look at LinkedIn because that's a big part of my content strategy. Got it. Now I'm going to find habits and common consensus. What are people talking about? That also tells you what they're not talking about. What is the format? We just talked about a lot of formatting with Amrita. Are people doing video? Are people doing text, long text, short text, right? Single sentence paragraphs, long paragraphs, or block text? And how are people engaging and interacting? All of this starts to kind of map out your field. And then again, step 3 is doing the opposite. To go against the grain, you have to know where the grain is going. That's step 2. And 3, a good example was the introduction of like single sentence paragraphs on LinkedIn. That was really new and novel for a little while. And so that grabbed attention. It was different, right? So use this formula to look for ways where you can stand out. And this could be for channels that are working really well. Hey, we want to keep our leadership position. Channels that are struggling, this will help you figure out why and try to stand out. And especially if you're launching something new. If you're considering launching a podcast, thought leadership site, whatever, use this. If you do this up front, all the work and investment, time and resources you're going to put into that later will pay off. All right. Heavy breath. Catch your breath. This is probably one of the more challenging parts I've come to realize for a lot of marketers, which is getting executive buy-in. Getting executives to believe, I would say first is to understand and then believe your vision and your plan. And so I'm going to share my number one tip that I start with. If you catch me at any company I work with full time, consulting, anything, I always advise to start with this. And that's to start with the CEO slide. Now I'm going to back out and show you what this is. So from folks, if you're in, I don't know if it happens at agencies. I've not worked at one, but a B2B company, every single one that I've worked at in January or whenever the fiscal year starts, you get usually some presentation from executives, and the CEO has the CEO slide, which is always contains her typically three, it could be more, but usually 3 strategic goals for the year. Now, oftentimes revenue is part of that. Some companies keep revenue aside. It's kind of like breathing. You have to do it to stay alive. I like to include revenue in the strategic goal. I think it is the most important process in your company and the most important metric, so it belongs in there. But the CEO slide usually has things like, double revenue, launch new product, crack into a new industry, crack into a new vertical, crack into a new geo, launch and dominate a category, right? These super huge things that have tons of cascading tasks and teams that work on them. Most content marketers don't start there. They start at growing followers, getting blog impressions, things like that. And it's not that those are the wrong KPIs. They're just the wrong ones to start with because they're not strategic. Even CEOs don't care too much about MQLs. They do until they go, well, how are they converting, right? And so when you start with the CEO slide, what you're doing, and I'll kind of speak from my own experience, is like one of them is category design. Last 2 current company I work with and the last one are launching a new category. And so what I'm doing is say, okay, if my CEO cares about launching and dominating a category, how do I directly or indirectly help make that successful with the content and the channels, if you will, that are in my control? And what you start to do is you build your plan. You have your strategic goals here, and you have your methods here, the things that you're actually going to do, and the KPIs you're tracking, and you specifically draw a line and say, this is how we're going to help with that. We're going to create content and track impressions on new category because we know we need to educate people on this new concept. We're going to track, just for example, MQLs on category content to see if we're getting, the right people to engage with us at a certain level. And then we're going to start to, maybe using attribution models in software, start to look at how is the folks that are starting to go through that content category, events and such, how is it actually resulting to pipeline and revenue? You're going to need some operations help here. I don't expect anyone to do this. I can't build a Salesforce report to save my life, but I can read them. And that's what really matters. Get help getting this sort of insight that you need so you can have a more strategic conversation with your CMO, your CEO, and say, hey, we're not just writing blogs. We're not just publishing on social media. We're educating the market. We're moving people from status quo to our solution. And this is how we're tracking that it's working. Month over month, quarter over quarter, setting goals, and being honest when they fall short and say, hey, here's how we're learning and here's how we're pacing. So I'll pause there. I think Amrita's going to join me again, and we're going to kind of chat through a little bit more of the how to get exec buy-in.
Yeah, I'm glad you ended with that. Lots of people start with that and it's just too big and a lofty, too lofty of a problem. I'll just give you like a little going against the grain quip. At Superside, in some ways, I would say we have the opposite problem where our CEO, for example, knows too much about marketing. Like he's like part marketer and he knows what the building blocks of a good content marketing machine is. So often the conversations don't start with the strategic outlook, but they start with, so what are we doing from an SEO lens? Or so what are we doing? Like it's kind of like ground up rather than top down. Any advice on how to deal with that?
Yes, I'm not immune to that either, by the way. And yes, so it's kind of annoying. And if you ask why, the why is the most offensive of the W's. What, why, when, like why is like people kind of get like, ugh. So I don't want to give you some like, well, Amrita, what motivated you to think of SEO? Like, it's kind of like too formal, but like candidly, I'll just be like, hey, yeah, I totally understand you're curious about our SEO plan. I'm curious, like why did you bring this up now? Like what happened? Because CEOs, execs are very busy. They context switch more than anybody in the planet, as far as I know, especially at the company. And so if my CMO or CEO come to ask about SEO, my hunch is something sparked that. And this is maybe where my sales background starts to come in, where I'm like doing discovery, where I'm like, was it board of directors meeting last week? Did someone, I don't know, but something happened. And so I start to try to understand why now. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's like very, very innocent. It's like, oh, I saw this report that Monday.com, this is actual example. Monday.com put out like 10,000 web pages in a year and it boosted their this to this, this, and this. And I'm just kind of curious why we're not doing that. I'm like, oh, that makes so much more sense now.
Yeah.
Well, we're an enterprise software and Monday.com has like a PLG motion where you can just go sign up immediately. And so my hunch, having not worked there, is that there's probably aligns with their strategy to pump out a ton of SEO because it's going to fill their funnel in a way that's better for us or better for them. If we try to do that, our ASP is 50 to 100 grand. We're not going to see the same result from the same tactic. That said, maybe we should open a conversation about how we can improve our SEO or increase our velocity because there's probably something else underlying there. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about being able to look at anything you're doing and answering why. You also need to know why not something else, right? Like, hey, I personally at Clary, I'm pumping out thought leadership because that's in the title and that's what we hired me to do. We can do SEO. We can make that a thing, but we haven't talked about that yet. So I don't feel behind. I don't feel like defensive. It's just like, okay, cool. The next thing's in the queue. Let's start to explore that and say, hey, is this a now thing, a plan for later thing? Or someone on a totally different team actually should be owning this and it's not even on me. And so I know it's like uncomfortable, especially if you're, I don't know, obviously everyone in the audience, if you're a little bit more junior or newer to an organization, it can be harder to have those conversations. But I find it's much better to have that even slightly contentious conversation now versus just being a task rabbit. I refuse to be a task rabbit. And someone says SEO, I jump and do an SEO. Or someone says this, I got to jump and do that. That's not a strategic way to go about your position at the company.
Yeah, that's fair. This dovetails nicely into like the next question, which is sort of around how to choose where to invest. And I know it depends on your audience. It depends on what channels you have set up, where, where you play, your market. There's so many factors. Is there a way that you personally think about it? Like here's
I do.
the Devin formula of figuring that out?
I do. And this is like, if there was a paste playbook, I think this is the beginning of it. So I will be honest, but I'm also honest, like the world's changing really quickly and we use Chat GPT to answer things more than Google sometimes. So like this could be outdated in a couple of years. But the way I think about it is social media is my top of funnel in terms of awareness and people going from unknown, they don't know I exist, to a follower. They know I exist and they like me in some way that they want to keep hearing from me. So that's my top of funnel. That's LinkedIn for me because we're in B2B. It could be different for other folks. Facebook, typically, Twitter, depending, right? So you get the idea. But I need some way to amplify to a large group of people who don't know me and pull them into my sphere. I don't know if I'm old school. I don't think it's novel, but like I'm an email list guy because I can write really well. So I know if I can get those followers to go from unknown to follower and then follower to subscriber, I now have a direct access to Amrita. The way I talk about it to my team sometimes is like, look, when we're on social, we're like at the mall. Amrita joined, you went to the mall, I went to the mall. Maybe we interface, we hang out and we leave, but it's in a neutral zone. When Amrita, you subscribe to my newsletter, kind of like inviting me over once a week. You're like, hey, Deb, I know you and I like you. Like you can come knock on the front door. We'll hang out for, we'll have tea, we'll have coffee, and then you can leave when I'm done reading your email.
Well,
That's
technically,
powerful.
it's me giving you my number.
My number, yeah, whatever. However you want to think about it. But that's why I think about it. So I want to go from what they call rent. If you're, I don't know if you follow like Anthony Canada, or I can never say his last name. Audience Plus, I love that guy. Is like rented and owned. I'm okay having a rented strategy, and I really am okay having an owned strategy. I want to get them there, and then you can do a lot of the tactical stuff of like, do you do nurture? Do you educate? Do you show customer case studies? Do you do thought leadership? But just having that access and that trust. That makes it easier. You now have an audience, right? If you want to host a cool event like this, you have people to invite. Like it's so hard to host an event if you don't have an audience. It's like, who the hell is going to come, right? So that's the way I would say is like have some social media for rented, have email for owned, and then start to look at things like events, podcasts. By the way, I almost never start with podcasts. It's the hardest audience to grow, so I probably wouldn't start there. But anyway, that's how I kind of think about it.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And then I guess like there's all of these different channels. I'll just use an example from our time here at Superside. And, when TikTok came out, we were like, oh my gosh, this is a very intense platform and we don't know if our audience is there. So, hey, we're not going to invest. A couple years go by and we're just like, are we going to be the dumb ones to not invest there? Let's try it. And let's try hard. Yeah. And we tried and it was excruciating. And then we've kind of like pieced out from that just because it was excruciating to like actually get seen and not really forget about like even views and stuff. Like we don't know if it impacted branded search or direct traffic or anything in that direct way. Any advice on sort of taking those kinds of moonshots and like what is a approach to even think about, hey, do we consider this a small win?
I smiled because I had the same conversation at Gong about TikTok, where someone on my team brought it to me and we had a really good debate on if we should do it or not. So the thing of it is, you feel like you haven't invested in TikTok and you missed the boat. Just remember that Clubhouse was a thing a year prior. And a lot of people jumped on. And no offense if you did, Amrita, or anyone in the chat, I didn't, but a lot of people did, and there was a lot of hype. And it flopped, right? So like, and I don't think too many people invested like so much, like so much time and energy into Clubhouse. I haven't heard those horror stories, but a lot of people did jump on it. And I think a lot of people were distracted by it. And so for me, when these things come, I go, is this hype or is this real? And you need to time tells, right? And so I would say the first thing is get on there as a user and start to experience it firsthand. I didn't get on TikTok. I did like twice. It's kind of confusing. This is weird. I don't know. I'm over it. I don't like it. So I waited and it died and I felt smart. Candidly. TikTok, similar, but I didn't get on it as fast as I wish I had. And I waited a little bit and I said, I think it was at Gong, I think we have the right brand for it. I think we have the right talent and enough. And there's the big one. We have enough content to repurpose. And that was a great way to start, is take the stuff we know works. And if we can't make it work on TikTok, then it maybe just isn't meant to be. The next problem was exactly what you said, Amrita, which was I have no idea how to track this thing. I have no clue. Like at the time, I don't think you could even put like a URL on stuff. And the idea of putting links, people are like, dude, you don't put links on TikTok. And I'm like, then I don't know if this is for me. Like candidly, like I can't just put tons of branded content out there, not track it at all. And even if I do see a big blip of direct search or whatever, like I can't even with like a very full level of confidence say it's this and not the other 12 things we've been doing right for a while. So like to me, I guess the short way to put it is it was the risk reward wasn't there for me. So yeah, I don't know. That was a very long answer to probably what was a short question, but that's how I thought about it.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. Like I think everyone goes through these emotions, right? It doesn't have to be TikTok specifically. It could be whatever. It could be should we invest in YouTube? Should we invest in, I don't know, Reddit, Behance, whatever your channels
Yeah.
are, content creation channels are, where you can potentially get eyeballs and distribution. It's that thing. It's like part of me believes, hey, with some persistence, you can make anything work. And then part of me is like, it's like a opportunity cost, right? Like just because you went down
Yeah.
this rabbit hole on, putting content on Reddit or Quora means like you're not putting it somewhere else, because no one has endless money and endless talent and endless
Exactly.
whatever. So it's like, how quickly do you want to move those bets around on that casino table, right? And that's the
Yeah.
magic. That's what I at least I personally struggle with, is like, when do you actually like give up and move to something else?
There's no single answer. There's no playbook, bruh. But there is like I put in timelines, which is like, look, I know even if we're going into the unknown, let's just say 6 months. I think is very, very generous. Is like within 3 months, what do we expect? And at what point is we're pulling the cord and we're just like, screw this thing. We got to put a line in the sand when you start, because what happens is the sunk cost fallacy starts to kick in and you're like, but we've been doing it for 4 months. I'm ready to give me 1 more month. I'll go viral in 1 more month. And then 1 more month. And you're like, I didn't go viral, but I got like, it's going up. And you like me a lot. So you're like, okay, Devin, 1 more month. And before you know it, you're 9 months in. And to your point, maybe you could have been doing it on LinkedIn or YouTube or something else, and you just lost all of that time. So I just think it's important to put some sort of line in the sand. You can be a little flexible, but I think a line in the sand is helpful to say, if we don't see this by this time, cut it and say, we learned. I celebrate it. I've turned stuff off and celebrated it like a funeral. Like, hey, lived a good life. We tried real hard. We learned a lot. And now we know this is not the path forward. Now let's keep trying and figure out what is.
Yeah, totally fair. Nice. Okay, there are audience questions. Let's see, there's quite a bit. Gigi asked, a lot of groups within marketing have their own strategies, email, ad, blog, etc. How do you reconcile all the strategies? I think what she's asking is that there's different factions inside marketing and maybe there's no cohesion. I think that's kind of where she's going with it. I know it's not entirely about content marketing, but you have a seat at the table. How do you think about it?
I think is like having what I call like there's different ways. There's like there's the goals that we talked about, right? Like the strategic goals. And then I think underneath that is like, what I kind of think about is like, what's the one message you want this year, your audience in the market to get? Right. So at Clary, it's like run revenue like a process. So our big POV is, it might be a little revenue-y for the marketers, but like it's like revenue right now, people think is like a number at the end of the quarter, right? You either hit 100% to goal, 40% or whatever. Clary's like, no, actually, revenue is a process. It's the process of getting revenue. And of course, it's the number at the end, but it's a process. So our whole thing for the year is everything blankets up to run revenue like a process. Has to line up to that. So then if you think that's our from and to, right? And this is the category play. So I know this is kind of bigger stuff than the, more tactical, but if the from is, use CRM, use BI, use spreadsheets, and revenue is a number, how do we get them to understand, oh, actually revenue is a process? Oh, crap, I'm behind. Oh, Clary is the platform to do that. That's your umbrella for the year. Then you have your messages, campaigns, and channels that all serve a purpose, the from to. So I think it was Didi. My advice would be, what is the from to for each of these channels, programs? And if you start to line them up and they're not consistent with each other, they're conflicting, then you can start to find what's missing, or not what's missing, but what's disjointed and what needs to be changed or removed. And so hopefully that level of consistency can kind of help give some clarity.
Yeah, that's a great answer, actually. Like I'd say, like, it's funny because it depends on who you ask. But if Gigi had asked me that question, I would have said, well, it's like your OKR process. If your OKRs are aligned, everything falls in line. But You've given the actual message, which is the company and the marketing team needs to be rallying around a unified point of view, brand promise, strategic narrative, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
But like everyone needs to be rallying around the same thing, and all your programs and campaigns need to ladder up to that in some way, shape, or form, directly or indirectly. That makes total sense. And then of course you need to follow the process of having the right goaling. Some companies follow a KPI process, some people follow an OKR process. We do OKRs, and the OKRs ensure that there's alignment across the board. But I would say it's like almost like the second step after what Devin said. You should clarify first. So great question. Thanks for spurring that discussion, Gigi. Sam is asking, I don't think we can answer this right this second, but Sam is asking, could we see examples applied to a B2C audience? I don't know if you have something that you could pull out of your hat trick, Devin, if you've seen
Duolingo's
Oh
TikTok.
yeah, great example.
Duolio's TikTok is an absolute banger. So go check that out. And then I saw there's another one has TikTok worked for B2B. I think Zapier is killing it right now. They're doing great
We've been killing it for a while.
Yeah. Okay. I'm late. I'm like, I found Post Malone like late in his career, maybe. So like, but yeah. So there's companies doing it for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of Duolingo, they launched, they're like the kings of like jumping on like these like funny trends, and like humor is a big part of their brand. So they launched this kind of like this like mock show, which is really just like a YouTube show. But the premise is there's all these hot singles trapped in a house, but no one speaks the same language. So how are they going to find love? Right. So it's like, it's about language at the core, but it's like jumped on this trend of like all these like shows like The Bachelor or Survivor or whatever, right? It's like the reality show thing. And they've made a whole show out of it, and it's hilarious. So Google that, watch the trailer, and it makes so much sense because now all these consumers know about them.
And it goes back to what's your your annual theme, which is like getting people to understand like the value of knowing more languages.
Yeah, exactly.
From what am I, monolingual? Whatever I am, I only know English. From one to multiple, or from two to more. Like that's probably their whole thing. I love that. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. And yeah, it's just like this is like how they've married it to their own brand voice, right? So like humor is a big part of it. So they've kind of made it kitschy and funny, which makes sense. Okay, more questions. We only got a couple more minutes. Oh my gosh, there's way too many.
That's good. People are
no webinar is complete if we don't talk about AI. So I'm just going to ask the AI question. But Claire's asking, Devin, how do you feel about the rise of AI content builders like ChatGPT? There's rumblings from execs that it can replace content writers, I think at her company. How can we show that it enhances content but does not replace someone?
Yeah, I get it too, by the way. And I love I'm not just saying it because they might be watching, but I love my bosses, so I'm not like throwing anyone under the bus. I think a lot of these things are honest. They're asked out of innocence. Like, honestly, should we be doing AI for more content, Devin? Like, I'm hearing a lot about it. You're my guy. What should we do? Like, I don't think no one, at least to me, has been like, can we replace so-and-so? Like, no, not yet. But my view is is AI right now, the generative AI capabilities are great for repurposing existing ideas or for truncating content. So think about it for this example. Amrita could take our conversation from today, put into a transcript and say, hey, can you give me the 20 best takeaways, right? Now her team can take that to repurpose content, make a blog, top 20 takeaways, blah, blah, blah. So it's going to speed up her content repurposing. If someone on your team is only doing that, then yes. Candidly, then yes. Because think of the assembly line back in the day making cars. People doing this all day. People do not this. That's me texting. People doing this. I was never on the assembly line, right? And then one day they said, actually, we're going to put this machine in here, and I don't need you anymore, because it's a doing activity, not a thinking activity. And so when I tell people to be cautious of their AI use, is don't replace your thinking. Your thinking is what makes you human. It's what makes you valuable. Coming up with new concepts, coming up with new ideas and new trends. AI hasn't done that yet. So do that stuff. Do the more strategic thinking. And then look for ways that you can augment and produce more, again, with your original thought. Kind of a nod to thought leadership.
Yeah. Great advice. There's another great question here. Zoe's asking, I'll say how she said it, but I want to add to that. So Zoe's asking, do the emotions change based on environmental situations, such as the looming recession? I think what she's really asking is, how your market feels and how your audience feels about certain things that your product might plug into changes over time. There's market forces. Do you adapt your content marketing to that, and how?
The answer is definitely yes. If your audience changes, then you should change with them for the most part. Try not to do too many superlatives like always and never, but this is a pretty damn close to always situation. The pandemic in 2020 is a great example of that for my career, which was again Gong, boisterous, jovial, happy, everything's good, everyone's winning, right? It was growth at all costs, everyone's happy. And then all of a sudden, everyone's scared as hell inside their house. No one knows what is remote work. Remember, we were calling it hybrid. We're calling it this weird stuff. We had no idea what was going to happen. If you go into you don't go into a funeral doing stand-up comedy, right? So if the audience has changed, if the societal vibe has changed, you should be aware of that. You want to be appropriate. But that doesn't mean you need to change your brand entirely, right? I think it's just shifting a little bit because, again, it was temporary. Pandemic's over. We're not in growth at all costs anymore, but people are a little bit more happy to laugh and joke than they were in April 2020. So there's no, I'm going to say it 100 times, Amrita, there's no playbook, bruh, but there is some general, just best practices to keep in mind as you're navigating your brand and your audience and your content.
And in addition to that, so the tone for sure, I could see that changing along with your market and your audience. What about the actual message? For the POV that you guys are running with at Clary right now is run revenue like a process. Does that point of view actually change at the highest level? Does the brand promise change because the market's feeling quite different?
It would have to be very substantial because you got to remember there's our entire marketing strategy category is on that sentence. So it would have to be almost catastrophic, I would say, to change that. So I wouldn't say that, but I would say the way that you position stuff could be. So loss aversion, I'm big on loss aversion, by the way. I leaned off of it in 2020 a little bit, right? I didn't want to add to the negativity into the uncertainty. But if you go on Claire's website, it's a huge loss aversion sentence in the H1, which is you're leaving revenue on the table. That's not positive. I wouldn't say it's negative, but it's not positive, right? And so even though we're in the midst of at least a recession in tech, there's inflation, life isn't as easy as it was a couple of years ago, at least here in the States for tech folks. But I don't think you need to all of a sudden be all happy-go-lucky and try to overcompensate either.
Yeah, it's such a fine balance. Okay, seriously, last question for reals. And I might butcher this name, but Fadua is asking, based on the Keep Trucking example, how can we find in which platforms our ICPs live? How do you even figure out where they are? That's actually a great question because it's the start of your content strategy, particularly if if you don't have one and maybe it's a new company.
Oh, I love this question. Okay, so where are you going to win is really important because it's where your audience is today. I'm going to give you my example and then how you can go figure it out. So first was at Gong, first marketing job. Mind you, I had no marketing experience. I just was creative and thought I could figure it out, folks. So I know now it's seems kind of obvious it was meant to be. It was not meant to be at the time. So I was as a salesperson, what do I do when I open my laptop? I go to Gmail, I go to Salesforce, and I go to LinkedIn. Those are 3 tabs that are open all day long. And I knew from experience. If you don't know from experience, you can go call these people, talk to these people. And there's even research online. You can figure it out without talking to customers, but good example. So I thought, okay, of those 3 places, I can build email. We talked about that. I can build on LinkedIn. Talked about that. Can't build in Salesforce. I'll leave that one alone. I didn't need to go super broad and do all that. Well, sometimes they're on Twitter and sometimes they're here. No, I just went all in on email and LinkedIn. And then when those audience grew, as I talked about earlier, then I started to scale. We did webinars, we did podcasts, we did all these other stuff, but started there. So for the Keep Trucking example, what does a trucker do when he or she wakes up in the morning? He or she grabs her keys, gets in the truck, probably in the truck all day, right? So how do I get their attention there? Versus fighting for it, maybe this is where my truck knowledge goes out the door. But when they're doing stops, when they're filling up gas, when they're taking their breaks, those are probably not the best times to try to steal their attention and market to them because they're kind of on break. So I hope that's helpful. I didn't catch the name as well, but I hope that's helpful. And just think what are they doing? Where are they literally living in person or digitally? And go find them there.
Yeah, and then just test and, you know, have like well-defined tests and like keep moving to the next one if you have like a good hypothesis.